Amelia Kerrigan stepped out of her sleek black car at the private airstrip, her sharp leather jacket glinting under the golden sunset. She was calm but focused, her hand carrying a sleek black helmet, while her other held a tablet with her flight details. Her helicopter, a custom-built marvel of engineering, was already prepped and waiting, its blades shining like mirrors. She glanced at her watch, lips tightening. She didn't have much time. As she walked briskly toward the aircraft, the sound of screeching tires broke the stillness. Police cars swarmed the tarmac, their sirens cutting through the peaceful hum of the evening. Amelia stopped in her tracks, her heart pounding in her chest. A group of officers poured out, weapons drawn, shouting for her to freeze. "What's going on?" she called out, her voice steady but sharp. "Step away from the helicopter," one of the officers barked, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amelia raised her hands, clearly annoyed but cooperative. "There's been a mistake. I'm the owner of this aircraft, and I'm fully licensed to fly." The officer, a stern-looking man with a buzz cut, stepped closer. "We've received multiple reports of unauthorized flight activity in this area. Your flight plan raises a lot of red flags." Amelia's jaw tightened. She was not the type to panic, even in the face of authority. "I'm a licensed pilot, and my flight plan has been approved. If there's a problem, we can sort it out, but I need to be in the air now." "Not so fast," another officer chimed in. "You're not going anywhere until we figure out what's really going on here." Amelia studied their faces. Their determination was clear. They weren't going to let her leave, no matter how urgent her mission was. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. She couldn't afford to lose control. "I don't think you understand," Amelia said, her voice low and firm. "People's lives are at stake." The officers exchanged skeptical glances. "And who exactly are you saving?" one of them asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That's not something I can discuss right now," Amelia replied curtly. "But trust me, every second counts." The buzz-cut officer wasn't buying it. "We've got rules for a reason, ma'am. If you're not willing to explain, then we're not letting you anywhere near that helicopter." Amelia's mind raced. She could try to argue, but it was clear they wouldn't believe her, not without proof. But how could she explain something so personal, so urgent, to people who only saw her as another privileged millionaire trying to bend the rules? Meanwhile, the police started inspecting her helicopter, running serial numbers, and double-checking the flight plan she had filed. Amelia stood by, her patience thinning with each passing moment. The sun was dipping lower, and the shadow of her helicopter stretched long across the tarmac. In the growing tension, Amelia's face hardened. She'd have fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to let bureaucracy stop her now. She wasn't just a CEO with a shiny helicopter. She was a woman on a mission that couldn't wait for red tape. "Listen to me," she said, her voice cutting through the chatter among the officers. "You don't know the full story, but you're wasting valuable time. I don't care what you think of me or my wealth or my helicopter. This isn't about me. It's about saving someone who doesn't have anyone else to fight for them." Her words hung in the air, heavy with a sincerity that caught even the most skeptical officers off guard. For a moment, they didn't know what to say. But it wasn't enough to convince them. Not yet. The buzz-cut officer nodded to another cop, signaling him to continue his inspection of the helicopter. Amelia's fists clenched at her sides. She couldn't tell them everything, not without risking even more danger. But she also couldn't stand here doing nothing while the clock ticked down. One thing was clear: if she didn't find a way to break through this wall of suspicion, everything she'd have fought for would be lost. As Amelia stood there, her helicopter's blades glinting in the fading sunlight, she couldn't shake the rising frustration. The police officers were thorough, inspecting every inch of her aircraft and double-checking her paperwork. Her hands remained steady at her sides, but inside, a storm was brewing. She glanced at her watch again, biting her lip. Every second spent here was one less chance to make it in time. The officers seemed more interested in her background and her flight plan. Amelia Kerrigan, one officer said, reading off a tablet. CEO of Kerrigan Tech. Big name, lots of money. A woman who could probably buy her way out of trouble. Her. Amelia's eyes narrowed. I worked for every penny I have, she said, her voice even but sharp. And I don't buy my way out of anything. I'm here because this is something I need to do. I followed all the rules. Check my credentials. They're solid. They didn't look convinced. One officer smirked, leaning closer. You've got everything money can buy, Miss Kerrigan, so why the hands-on approach? Why not hire someone to fly for you? Amelia didn't answer right away. Her mind flashed back to her younger self, standing in a cold garage, tinkering with an old, battered engine. Flying had always been her dream, her escape. Helicopters were more than a hobby. They were a symbol of her freedom, a testament to how far she'd come. But this wasn't the time to explain her love for flying. Not to these people. They wouldn't understand. Instead, she replied curtly, because sometimes you have to take control yourself. I trust my skills more than anyone else's. The officers exchanged looks, clearly not satisfied. Look, she said, exhaling slowly, I don't have time to explain every detail of my life to you. Just know this, I'm not doing anything illegal. I need to get up there because someone's life is in danger. Who? The officer pressed. Amelia's jaw tightened. She couldn't tell them the truth, not yet. Not without putting everything at risk. That's personal, she said firmly. Personal wasn't enough for them. The lead officer shook his head. If you're not going to cooperate, then we're going to have to hold you here until we figure out what's really going on. Amelia felt the weight of his words. She was running out of time. She glanced at her helicopter again, its sleek frame gleaming in the dim light. Every fiber of her being wanted to climb inside, start the engine, and take off. But the officers weren't budging. As the moments ticked by, her mind drifted back to her childhood. She had grown up in a small, run-down neighborhood where dreams often died before they had a chance to take flight. Her brother, Lucas, had been her rock during those years, always encouraging her to aim higher, to never settle. But life had taken them on different paths. Lucas had struggled, fallen into dark places, and eventually disappeared. When she had finally tracked him down months ago, he had been a shell of the brother she once knew. Yet, there was still a flicker of hope in his eyes, a glimmer of the man he could become again. That flicker was why she was here now, risking everything. Lucas was in danger, and she couldn't sit back and wait for someone else to help him. The officers didn't know any of this. To them, she was just another rich person bending the rules. But Amelia wasn't about to give up. One of the younger officers approached her, his expression softer than the others. Look, he said quietly, if there's really a life at stake, you need to tell us. We can't help you if you don't. Amelia met his gaze, her eyes fierce. If I tell you, it could put that person in even more danger. I can't take that risk, not until I'm sure they're safe. The young officer hesitated, clearly torn, but before he could respond, the lead officer barked an order. Stop chatting and finish the inspection. Amelia clenched her fists. She needed a way out of this standoff. She wasn't going to let bureaucracy or suspicion stand in her way. She had come too far, fought too hard, to be stopped now. The air felt heavier as the minutes stretched on. Amelia could see the police officers talking in hushed voices, occasionally glancing her way. Their suspicion hung thick in the air, and she knew they were piecing together her recent activities. It wouldn't take them long to uncover details she hadn't planned on sharing. She kept her face neutral, but inside, a wave of unease rippled through her. Miss Kerrigan, the lead officer finally said, stepping closer. We've been digging into your flight records. You've been making a lot of unusual trips lately, remote locations, off-the-grid airstrips. Care to explain what that's about? Amelia's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let it show. Instead, she crossed her arms, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. My business often takes me to hard-to-reach places. Not everything happens in boardrooms, officer. He raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. Funny thing is, none of those trips seem to have been logged with your company. No clear connections to any of your ventures. Looks more like personal missions. Amelia didn't flinch, but her mind raced. They were getting closer to the truth, closer to uncovering something she wasn't ready to reveal. She needed to shift their focus, or at least buy herself more time. Maybe you should spend less time speculating about my personal life and more time clearing me to fly, she said sharply. I've already explained that I'm not breaking any laws. The officer smirked, clearly enjoying the power dynamic. You've explained nothing, and until you do, you're not going anywhere. Another officer, a woman with piercing eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, approached the lead. She held a folder, flipping it open as she glanced at Amelia. We've got something interesting here, she said. The locations match recent activity involving a known criminal syndicate. They've been using private aircraft to move, well, things we don't want them moving. Drugs, people, weapons. What do you know about that, Miss Kerrigan? Amelia's stomach turned, but her expression remained calm. She had no ties to criminals, but her recent actions could easily look suspicious, and the last thing she needed was for the police to jump to the wrong conclusion. I don't know anything about any syndicates, she said evenly. And if you're suggesting I'm involved in something illegal, you're wasting your time. My flight plan is clear. Check it again. The woman didn't back down. We did, that's the problem. It's too clean. Almost like someone wanted it that way. Amelia's patience was wearing thin. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a serious tone. Look, you don't know me. You don't know what I've been through or what I'm trying to do. But I'll tell you this. I don't break the law, and I don't work with criminals. I'm here because someone I care about is in danger, and I'm the only one who can help them. The officers exchanged glances again, their skepticism unwavering. Amelia felt the weight of their judgment, but refused to let it crush her. She had learned long ago that the world rarely gave the benefit of the doubt to people like her, people who had clawed their way to the top. She wasn't about to start pleading her case now. But then one of the officers, a younger man who had been quietly observing, spoke up. If someone's in danger, he said cautiously, why not ask for our help? That's what we're here for. Amelia turned to him, her expression softening for a moment. Because this isn't a situation where the usual rules apply. If the wrong people find out what I'm doing, it could make things worse. Trust me when I say I'm doing what's necessary. The lead officer wasn't impressed. That's not good enough. Until we know more, you're grounded. Amelia's frustration boiled over. She clenched her fists, taking a deep breath to steady herself. I don't have time for this, she muttered under her breath. But as she looked around, her sharp mind began to work on a new angle. If they wouldn't let her leave willingly, she'd have to find another way. She wasn't about to let them, or anyone, stop her from saving Lucas. Amelia stood rooted on the tarmac, her mind racing. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the airstrip bathed in twilight. She could see her reflection in the polished metal of her helicopter, a determined face, tense but unyielding. Time was slipping through her fingers, and the police were still standing in her way. She needed them to understand, or at least let her go. The lead officer walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was carrying a tablet now, scrolling through something with an expression that didn't bode well. Miss Kerrigan, he said, his tone almost mocking, you've got quite the history of going off the grid. Remote destinations, encrypted communications, and now this emergency. You sure you're not hiding something? Amelia exhaled sharply, her patience wearing thin. What I'm doing is none of your business, but if you're so eager to know, fine. I'll tell you what I can. This caught their attention. The officers leaned in slightly, their skepticism still evident, but mixed with curiosity. Amelia took a steadying breath and began. I have a brother, she said, her voice quieter now. Lucas. We used to be close when we were younger. He's brilliant, but life hasn't been kind to him. He got mixed up in the wrong crowd, made some bad choices. I've been trying to help him get back on track, but Her voice faltered for a moment, then she pushed on. He disappeared a few months ago, cut off all contact. The younger officer, the one who had spoken up earlier, looked at her with newfound interest. And you think he's in danger now? Amelia nodded. I don't think, I know. I've been tracking his movements, trying to find him. It hasn't been easy. He's been moving from place to place, but recently I got a lead. A message from someone who claimed to know where he is. They said he's in trouble. Big trouble. The lead officer raised an eyebrow. And you didn't think to share this with us earlier? Why not come to the authorities? Amelia's jaw tightened. Because the people he's mixed up with aren't the kind you can take on with a badge and a warrant. They're dangerous. If they even suspect someone's coming for him, they'll kill him. I couldn't take that risk. The female officer with the piercing eyes frowned. So you were planning to handle this all by yourself? Just fly in and, what, rescue him? Amelia hesitated. It did sound reckless when she heard it aloud, but she had no other choice. I didn't have time to come up with a perfect plan. All I knew was that he needed me, and if I waited, it might have been too late. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that some of them were beginning to believe her, or at least understand her desperation. But the lead officer wasn't convinced. He shook his head and crossed his arms. This still doesn't explain the shady flight plans and remote locations, he said. You're not telling us the whole story. Amelia squared her shoulders, meeting his gaze head-on. Because I can't. Not yet. The more you know, the more danger you'll be in. And the more danger Lucas will be in. All I'm asking is for you to let me go. Let me do what I have to do. The younger officer stepped forward again, his face conflicted. If what you're saying is true, then Lucas might have information we need. Something that could help us bring down these people. But if you go in alone, you might make things worse. Amelia looked at him, her expression softening slightly. I'm not trying to get in your way. But Lucas doesn't trust anyone right now. He's scared. If he sees a badge, he'll run, or worse, they'll catch him. The only chance I have of getting him out alive is if I go in alone. Silence fell over the group. The officers were clearly divided. Some were beginning to side with Amelia, while others remained skeptical. Finally, the lead officer sighed, rubbing his temples. Even if we wanted to help you, we can't just let you take off without clearance. We'd be breaking protocol. Amelia clenched her fists. She was so close, but the barriers were still in place. She needed to find a way to convince them, or bypass them altogether. Because no matter what, she wasn't leaving without Lucas. The tension between Amelia and the officers was as thick as the humid night air. She stood firm, though her heart raced. Lucas's face flashed in her mind, his once bright eyes now shadowed by fear and desperation. She couldn't let him down, not when she was so close. The lead officer turned to his team, motioning them to step away for a moment. Amelia watched as they huddled, their voices low but intense. She couldn't make out the words, but she knew they were debating what to do. Her hands clenched into fists at her sides. The seconds felt like hours. The younger officer approached her again. His name tag read Officer Daniels, and his eyes carried a hint of empathy that the others lacked. He stopped a few steps away, speaking just loud enough for her to hear. Look, Miss Kerrigan, Daniels began, his voice steady but kind. I can tell you're not lying. You're worried about your brother, and I get that. But you've got to understand where we're coming from. We've seen people say whatever they need to get away with something shady. You need to give us more if you want our help. Amelia sighed, running a hand through her hair. She knew he was right, but how much could she safely reveal? Every word felt like a gamble. Lucas isn't just in trouble, she said finally, her voice low and urgent. He has something, evidence, proof of what these people are doing. It's why they're after him. If they find him before I do, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Daniels's brow furrowed. Evidence of what? Amelia hesitated, but decided it was time to lay at least some of her cards on the table. They're running a major operation, trafficking drugs, weapons, even people. Lucas got caught up in it, but now he's trying to get out. He managed to steal something important from them, something they don't want anyone else to see. Daniels nodded slowly, absorbing her words. And you think you can get him out without their notice? I don't have a choice, she said firmly. He won't trust anyone else. If he sees me, maybe, just maybe, he'll let me help him. Before Daniels could respond, the lead officer returned, his expression grim. We've got a problem, he announced, looking between Amelia and his team. We just got a report. There's been activity at a remote airstrip about 30 miles from here, matches the locations Miss Kerrigan's been flying to recently. Amelia's stomach dropped. She knew exactly where they were talking about. That had to be where Lucas was. They spotted armed men moving equipment, the officer continued. Looks like a potential deal or a handoff. And if your brother's involved, Miss Kerrigan, he might already be out of time. Her pulse quickened. Then you need to let me go. Now. The lead officer shook his head. No way. If this is what we think it is, it's too dangerous. We need to handle it properly. Backup, tactical teams, the works. There's no time for that. Amelia shot back, her voice rising. By the time you gear up and get there, it'll be too late. Lucas will be gone, or worse. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. Daniels stepped forward again. What if we work together, he suggested. You've got the skills to get in and out quickly, and we've got the resources to back you up. We can combine forces. Amelia's eyes narrowed. And what happens when Lucas sees your badges? He'll bolt. All those men will see you coming and kill him on the spot. Daniels frowned, but didn't argue. The lead officer rubbed his temples, clearly weighing the options. This is insane, he muttered. Amelia took a step closer, her voice steady but filled with urgency. I know it's risky, but Lucas is my brother. I'm not going to sit here while you argue about protocols. I need to get to him before it's too late. For a moment, no one spoke. The air seemed to buzz with unspoken tension. Then, to Amelia's surprise, Daniels turned to the lead officer. She's right. We don't have time to wait. Let's use her knowledge of the area and her helicopter to get us there faster. We can figure out the rest on the way. The lead officer looked between Daniels and Amelia, his expression a mix of frustration and resignation. Finally, he let out a sharp breath. Fine, but this doesn't mean we're doing it your way, Miss Kerrigan. We're coming with you and you follow our lead. Got it? Amelia nodded, though she had no intention of handing over control. Lucas's life depended on her, and she wouldn't let anything, or anyone, stand in her way. Amelia climbed into the cockpit of her helicopter, her movements quick and precise. The officers gathered their gear and loaded into the back, with Officer Daniels taking the seat beside her. The weight of their presence didn't ease her anxiety. Every second they spent preparing was another second lost, and Lucas couldn't afford any more delays. Remember, the lead officer said sharply, his voice cutting through the hum of the helicopter's engine, you're flying us in, but you follow our lead once we're on the ground. No heroics, Miss Kerrigan. Amelia didn't respond. Her focus was locked on the controls as she powered up the aircraft. The rotors began to spin, slicing through the night air with increasing speed. She glanced at Daniels, who was adjusting his headset. You'd better hold on, she said. This won't be a smooth ride. Daniels gave her a faint smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. He was nervous, and Amelia couldn't blame him. This wasn't a standard operation for anyone involved. As the helicopter lifted off, the view below quickly became a patchwork of dark fields and winding roads. The stars above provided faint light, but Amelia relied on her instruments to guide her. The destination was etched into her memory, a remote airstrip hidden away in a dense forest. She had been there before, during her desperate search for Lucas. The cabin was quiet except for the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the police radio. Amelia kept her hands steady on the controls, but her mind raced. She could feel the weight of the officer's doubts and suspicions pressing down on her, but she shoved them aside. Lucas was all that mattered now. Daniels broke the silence. "What's the plan when we get there?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. Amelia glanced at him briefly. "I'll spot the landing zone and keep the engine running. Once I've got eyes on Lucas, I'll go to him. He'll trust me, but if he sees you or the others, he'll bolt." The lead officer's voice cut in over the headset. "That's not happening. We're not letting you go in alone." "Then we have a problem," Amelia shot back. "Lucas won't talk to anyone else. He'll think it's a trap." The lead officer didn't respond, but Amelia could feel his disapproval radiating from the back of the cabin. Daniels, however, seemed to be considering her words. "Let's take it step by step," Daniels said, trying to mediate. "We'll assess the situation when we land. If it's safe, maybe we give her a minute to talk to him before we move in." Amelia didn't thank him. There was no time for gratitude. She pushed the helicopter harder, her focus narrowing as they neared the airstrip. The closer they got, the more her anxiety built. What if she was too late? What if Lucas was already gone, or worse? The first sign of the airstrip came into view, faint lights glowing in the distance, surrounded by an inky forest. Amelia adjusted her altitude, slowing the helicopter as they approached. She scanned the area, her trained eyes picking up movement near the edge of the strip. "There," she said, pointing. "See those shadows? Those are people, armed from the looks of it." Daniels leaned forward, squinting into the darkness. "You're right. Could be a deal going down." The lead officer's voice crackled over the headset. "Take us down, Kerrigan, but keep your distance. We need to stay out of sight." Amelia complied, landing the helicopter behind a line of tall trees that shielded them from view. The moment the skids touched the ground, the officers sprang into action, checking their weapons and preparing to move. Amelia powered down the rotors slightly but kept the engine running, ready for a quick escape. She turned to Daniels, who was about to follow the others. "Wait," she said urgently. "If you go in guns blazing, you'll spook them. Let me go first. I can draw Lucas out before anyone realizes what's happening." Daniels hesitated, his hand hovering over his radio. "You're asking for a lot of trust, Miss Kerrigan." "Then trust me," she said, her voice firm. "If I fail, you can do things your way. But if you want to save my brother and stop whatever's happening here, let me try." Daniels glanced at the lead officer, who was giving orders nearby. Finally, he nodded. "You've got 2 minutes. Don't make me regret this." Amelia didn't waste time. She grabbed a flashlight and slipped out of the helicopter, her heart pounding. The forest was alive with the sounds of the night, but her focus was razor-sharp. She moved toward the airstrip, keeping low and quiet. As she neared the clearing, she saw him. Lucas was there, his figure tense and hunched, surrounded by 3 men with rifles slung over their shoulders. He looked thinner than she remembered, his face pale and drawn. Amelia's chest tightened. He was so close, but the danger surrounding him was all too real. She would have to tread carefully. One wrong move could cost them both everything. Amelia crouched low behind the bushes, her heart pounding like a drum. She could see Lucas clearly now, standing just a few feet from the armed men. His hands were stuffed into the pockets of his jacket, his body language nervous and defensive. He looked so different from the confident younger brother she remembered. The sight made her chest tighten with both relief and sadness. She knew she had to act quickly. Time was slipping away, and the longer she waited, the greater the risk of something going wrong. Amelia took a deep breath to steady her nerves, then stepped out of the shadows, keeping her hands visible. "Lucas," she called softly but firmly. His head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. For a moment, he froze, staring at her as if she were a ghost. The men around him turned sharply, their hands instinctively reaching for their weapons. "Who the hell is that?" One of them growled, his voice sharp and suspicious. Amelia held her ground, raising her hands slightly to show she wasn't a threat. I'm here for my brother, she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. That's all. I don't want any trouble. The men exchanged wary glances, their grips tightening on their guns. Lucas, however, took a step forward, his face a mixture of confusion and desperation. Amelia, what are you doing here? I'm here to take you home, she said, her eyes locked on his. You don't belong here, Lucas. Let me help you. One of the men stepped between them, his face hard and cold. This isn't a family reunion, lady. Get lost before you regret it. Amelia didn't flinch. She knew she couldn't show weakness. I'm not leaving without him, she said firmly. You can't keep him here. Whatever deal you're making, it ends now. The man smirked, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But you don't call the shots here. Amelia's mind raced. She needed to de-escalate the situation before it spiraled out of control. She glanced at Lucas, silently pleading with him to make a move, to run to her. But he didn't. He stood frozen, torn between fear and guilt. Then, in the distance, a faint sound reached her ears, the crunch of footsteps approaching through the forest. Amelia's heart sank. The police. They were moving in, and the men would notice any second. She had to act now. Lucas. She called again, louder this time. Please, trust me, let's go. One of the armed men turned his head slightly, catching the sound of movement. His expression darkened. What's going on? He snapped, his eyes darting toward the trees. Amelia seized the moment. She darted forward, grabbing Lucas by the arm. Run, she shouted. For a second, Lucas didn't move, his body stiff with shock. Then, as if her voice broke through the fog in his mind, he sprang to life. Together, they bolted toward the trees, their footsteps pounding against the hard ground. Stop them, one of the men yelled, raising his weapon. Before he could fire, the forest erupted with the sound of shouts and flashing lights. The police had arrived, their guns drawn and voices commanding. Chaos ensued as the men scattered, some trying to fight while others ran for cover. Amelia didn't look back. She kept running, pulling Lucas along with her. The forest seemed endless, the trees blurring together as adrenaline fueled her every step. Finally, they broke through the tree line and stumbled toward the waiting helicopter. Daniels was there, waving them over, his face a mix of relief and urgency. Hurry, he shouted. Amelia and Lucas clambered into the helicopter just as the rotors roared to life. Daniels helped pull Lucas aboard, slamming the door shut behind them. The lead officer was in the cockpit, shouting orders into his radio. As the helicopter lifted off, Amelia collapsed into a seat, her chest heaving with exhaustion. Lucas sat beside her, his face pale but alive. She reached out, gripping his hand tightly. You're safe now, she said, her voice trembling. Lucas didn't speak, but his eyes filled with tears. He squeezed her hand, a silent acknowledgement of her sacrifice and determination. Below them, the chaos of the raid continued, the police closing in on the remaining men. For now, they were out of danger. But Amelia knew this wasn't the end. There were questions to answer, explanations to give, and Lucas's recovery to focus on. As the helicopter soared into the night, Amelia allowed herself a small smile. She had risked everything, but it had been worth it. Lucas was safe, and for the first time in months, hope flickered in her heart.